Hey, Scuttlebutt listeners. Welcome to episode 243. This week, we welcome David Kniess and Dennis Mannion to the Scuttlebutt. David is the director of the films The Gift and The Siege at Kniess, and Dennis is a Marine Vietnam veteran and the subject of The Siege at Kniess. Both The Gift and The Siege are such beautiful films, and David's skill as a filmmaker is evident in his winning the Marine Corps Heritage Foundation's Major Norman Hatch Award for The Gift in 2023, and this year's Sergeant William Kneiss Award for The Siege at Kniess. When we heard the award announcement, we knew we wanted to get David in studio. So when he suggested we invite Dennis as well, our collective heads almost exploded. And even with the anticipation, the actual interview exceeded our expectations. What a treat. We talk about the movies, David's vision, and how it is he sees the story in people, David and Dennis's backstory, and Dennis's experiences then and now. But honestly, it's all really good, and I hope you enjoy spending time with these two as much as we did. This is episode 243. Hey, Scuttlebutt listeners. Thank you for joining us and your continued support. I'm Vic. I'm here with Nancy.
Hey, Vic. How you doing?
Saturday morning.
Saturday morning. We're so dedicated. We're in here on a Saturday morning.
Yeah, well, I had to mow the lawn. That's my other job. So I took care of that and then figured we'd jump in the studio for a little podcast thing.
Say, did you use this as an excuse to get out of mowing the lawn? Or?
No, yeah, I didn't want to do it at home, so I did it here. But how are you doing on
I'm
a
good.
Saturday?
A big night tonight. The Marine Corps Heritage Foundation
And you're going,
Awards.
right?
I am going.
Because a
to
couple of your submissions...
First Sergeant Chase McGroarty Hunter won the Tom Bartlett Award.
Decent
Awesome.
Marine.
Yep,
Yeah.
and the Bartlett Award is named after legendary leatherneck Tom Bartlett. So very excited.
Yeah.
Also, a lot of old colleagues, old friends. Looking forward to seeing all those people.
You going to go get your hair did after this?
You're the second person to ask me that today, and I'm starting to wonder, do I need to?
No, because you mentioned it a couple of times. You mentioned it, so.
Yeah, it'll all be good.
Nice.
It'll be good.
Yeah.
But thanks.
Yeah, no. Well, I mean, not that you need it, right? Maybe you should have let off with that.
I'm just teasing you.
Well, we are really excited. So the actual reason that we're here on a Saturday, as Nancy had mentioned, is we had the awards show. So we were out in the Marine Corps parking lot flagging down people coming to the museum. Like, hey, are you part of the awards show? We happened to be flagging down director extraordinaire David Kniess and the subject of his award-winning film, The Siege at Kniess, Dennis Mannion. Gentlemen, thank you so much for allowing us to flag you down and to come on in.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, this is great. And Dennis, where are you coming in from?
I drove in from Connecticut yesterday.
Oh, you drove in?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I'm older now. I turned 80 in February, but not too many years back, I drove my son down for OCS.
Oh.
And I dropped him off. As soon as he disappeared into the barracks, I drove back to Connecticut the same day. I could do that then now.
Yeah.
Now.
How long ago was that?
210, somewhere around that.
Okay. Is he still in the service?
No, he's out. He did 6 years. He was in the reserves.
Okay.
Yeah, he really wanted to do it. He's the only one of our sons who's in the military.
Yeah.
He's an English teacher and a football coach. That's what I was. So it's kind of what he wanted to do.
Yeah, that's awesome. What MOS did he end up getting?
Infantry.
He was a grunt?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Which is what you wanted.
Yeah. And I didn't get for some reason, but there's a reason for that. I think that's, he's pleased with where he's at in his life, and he's coaching and teaching. So
that's awesome. That's awesome. And so speaking of your high school teaching career, and we'll get into your Marine Corps career, obviously is very important, but as a high school teacher, you had a young student who turned into a decent human being later on, right? Were you David's actual teacher?
Yes. I kid about that because if he hadn't been in my English class, senior English, I wouldn't be here. I don't know whether he would be.
Yeah.
I mean, he graduated in 88, so that whole year, 87 to 88.
That was my year, David.
Yeah.
Generation X.
Yeah.
That's how that happened, and you kind of know the film anyway. But when I flunked out of college, when I got out of the Marines, I went back to college. I went to UConn, and I graduated with a degree in English and education. And I got a job at Sheehan High School in Wallingford, that was the third year the building was open. It opened up in '71. That's when my wife was a first-year teacher there. And I was given senior English because a lot of English teachers didn't want senior English because by the spring kids are crazy.
Yeah, there's barn smelling for sure.
But I felt I could handle that pretty easily, and so it worked out pretty well. And so that's what I basically had was senior English. And David showed up in the fall of '87.
Yeah. Decent student.
Oh, he still owes me a few quizzes. And then that became the beginning of a friendship. And at some point, it was no longer Mr. Mannion, but it was Dennis. But that was probably during the trip, I'm guessing. But when he heard
25 years ago, 26 years
when he
ago.
heard I was going back, we had stayed in touch after he went in the Navy
Kniess.
and went to college. Yeah, and the only reason I went back was so that I could go to 861. I would not have gone there and stood down at the old combat base and looked up and said, there it was.
Right.
The only reason I went is because I learned that I could go on the hills. And Glenn Prentice, he's the guy. And every Marine Corps reunion in those days, we'd have one every year. There'd be a table set up with battle tours going back, and I'd say, do you go to the hills? No one goes on the hills. It's too dangerous, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, because you guys had like UXO and stuff. I saw that.
Yeah. But this Glenn Prentice, who was the driving force in all that, he had been the year before, and I met him. I had only known him at the reunions, and he said, I'll take you back next year if you want to go. So that's when Bob Arata went, and Paul Knight and myself, and then a couple other people went with us. And Dave heard we were going, and he said, can I come with you?
Wow.
I said, sure.
That's awesome.
Well, David, what was it about Dennis as your teacher? What was...
I got to back way up.
Yeah, please.
I had a fascination with the Vietnam War since I was about 10. And I think it was around 12, I picked up a book by Philip Caputo, A Rumor of War.
Yeah.
Life-changing book for me.
And I couldn't put it down. And I don't know where the fascination, because I had an uncle who was a Marine with the 5th Marines. He was there during Tet in '68 in Way City. But he was one of the first wave of Marines who came in '65, in Da Nang, and went back again in '68. And that was the only link I had to the Vietnam War. But I love history. But there was just this fascination with Vietnam. So when I got to high school, and before I got to high school, I was reading all these books. I've read them all. I got boxes of books. I get to high school, and I think I was a sophomore, and one of the kids had Mannion as a teacher, and they're like, yeah, he talks about Vietnam for 2 weeks. We take 2 weeks out of the year, and that's all we talk about, what he went through in Vietnam. I'm like, really? And then the kid's like, I can't remember the guy's name. He's like, next week we're all going to the theater with him to see Platoon. And I'm like, can I go? So I went.
Wow.
And it was, Dennis and I don't know how many kids were there. There was a lot of kids, 20. Yeah. And we're all sitting there watching Platoon. And I remember looking over and watching your face, and you were just so zeroed in on that. Yeah. So that was my first experience of like, oh, this is Dennis Mannion, And then at one point you were going to be the football coach because
that was 90.
Borelli was leaving.
Yeah.
So everybody went out for the team. I went out. It was like the spring training before the tryouts and all that, and then all of a sudden they shit canned him like, oh no, we're going to bring back the guy. He wants to come back, the old coach. Yeah, so everybody kind of peeled back. Well, I'm not going to play for that guy. So I never played. Yeah. But I begged. Was it Wertheim? Was she the English teacher there?
Sheila, yeah. I
begged her. I said, I need to get Dennis Mannion's class next year. And she's like, well, I don't know, And I'm like, no, I need to.
So it's like, well, you may not know, but I know.
Well, Joan was a guidance counselor, and she was not in David's alphabetical range.
Right.
And so other people would come down and see all those counselors and say, can you? But
somehow I got in there.
Yeah.
Nice.
Because there were 3 senior English teachers. So.
And everybody wanted his class. It was tough to get in there because I wanted to hear those stories, So when he used to, when that time period came, I don't remember what part of the year it was, but it was like, okay, for the next week or two, we're going to talk about Vietnam.
Because in the curriculum for senior English at that time, I don't know whether it's different now, it was anything except British or American literature. And so I did Dante's Inferno, that covered Italian. I did
Tim O'Brien.
Well, that was later. So then initially it was All Quiet on the Western Front. And ironically, I took my father would send me film where the processing was already paid for when I took pictures during the siege and my other times in Vietnam. And I would mail them to Kodak in Rochester, New York. And my father never paid attention to whether it was slides or prints. So when I got home in October of '68, one of the first things my mother said was, "We have all your slides in a tray. We have all your prints in an album." I said, "I don't give a shit." She said, "What?" I said, "I don't want them. You can throw them out." I hadn't seen them because you don't see the.
It was just still too real. Yeah.
I said, "I don't want them. I'm not interested. I'm not interested." She said, "You can't mean that." I said, "Ma, I'm telling you, whenever the trash is this week, you can just chuck them." And then 14 more months in the Marine Corps, and then 3 years at UConn, and then I get to Sheehan, and in the curriculum was All Quiet on the Western Front. And I thought, well, that's trench warfare and dealing with incoming when you're helpless. And so I called her up, and that was 10 years later, and said, or not 10 years, but roughly.
Yeah.
And I said, did you throw them out? And she said, "No, I didn't throw them out."
Good job, Mom.
Yeah, really.
Moms come to the rescue all the time. So
Yeah, they do.
that's how that happened initially. And eventually I got out of All Quiet on the Western Front because I was sort of a renegade. I'll give you an example. My wife had student teachers pretty regularly when she was an English teacher. I'm in their Hall of Fame. I was there 30 years and bought 3 for the Marines. I never had a student teacher. They didn't like my style. I didn't have desks in rows. I was anti everything.
Circle, yeah,
I didn't have a real desk. I just had 2 filing cabinets with a door on top of it.
The field desk.
It just was so. There was a couch in the room. If you got there first, you could sit in the couch. And so they never asked me to be a student. Have a student teacher. They just
Big
didn't want
mistake
that.
on their part, really.
Well,
I'm serious.
He
was ahead of his time.
I was ahead of my time.
You
So
are.
eventually I began to work my way into that's when I went to Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien, which is an incredible book.
Right.
It's just incredible on so many levels. And, I taught deliverance and, it went to the Board of Education in a huge fight with parents who didn't want deliverance being taught. But it's an incredible book. It's just One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I was bringing in American literature anyway, and
I think we
let me
just got
alone.
our next interview for our Commandant's Professional Reading List.
Yeah,
series.
there you go. Yeah, I mean,
we're doing a series on the Commandant's Professional Reading List, and we're asking authors and book connoisseurs and stuff to come in and either, if their book's on it, to talk about their book, or connoisseurs like yourself to give a critic. So we will be in touch.
I wish I had been in your English class.
I've heard a lot of people say that. I'm very grateful. I knew what I needed to do and wanted to do, and it worked out for me.
Well, and it made us as students want to learn more.
Yeah.
Because he made it
excited the
exciting.
curiosity,
right? It wasn't
yeah.
like, oh, God, I got to go in there now. We're going to talk about Dante's Inferno. He would, act out scenes in that thing,
We read Dante's Inferno. We read The Hunchback of Notre Dame. We read All Quiet on the Western Front, or probably the Things They Carried by then, and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And, it just...
It's so good.
Speak so well, yeah.
And then when he got to the whole Quezon stuff, he would bring the stuff in, like the green towel. He would hold it up at the window. Yeah. You see all those holes?
Yeah.
That's shrapnel, And he would tell the story about how that towel was ripped full of shrapnel, or he'd bring in a mortar.
The original one.
Mortar rounds,
right
the spent things from mortar rounds.
But that's me. Back in the day, I could probably go in the attic and find the plastic bag my high school ring came in. I'm a collector kind of way. So I mailed all that stuff home to my high school buddy, and he kept them until I got home. The binoculars, the towel, the mortar fin assembly,
stolen
pieces of shrapnel. So
is that the friend you sent the letter to?
So actually, that's
he
edited.
I'm jumping ahead a little.
No, that's okay. David edited that a little bit. So I wrote to Joe this farewell letter to him. He was my best friend from high school, and it was submitted at the New York in '85. They built a wall in New York City, a glass wall with letters from veterans, had to be written in Vietnam, and it got selected. It's edited, because I had to leave the motherfucker out of it. They did.
Those motherfuckers.
Well, you can have the motherfucker in here.
It's on the wall. It's on the wall, and I lost my train of thought on that. I don't want to be.
You talk about how you had written him, but it was a little bit edited for
Oh,
the
yeah.
video.
So in the film, I wrote to Joe, and then I wrote this farewell letter to him. And then I sent another letter to my parents in an envelope to Joe and to say, when I get killed.
Yeah.
I wrote them the same day, January 31st, which was the first day of the Tet Offensive. And it was, people were dying up there pretty regularly, and I just thought, I'm not going to survive this. And so that's why I did it. But in the film, it's like I wrote to Joe, send this to my parents, which is true.
Yeah.
But, you have to edit it for brevity. For instance, another thing at the end of that film, I'm getting out. I'm going home. Well, I was getting out of the field. I went to the 12th Marines and naval gunfire for the whole summer of '68, and then went home in October. So my MOS was 0849 naval gunfire. And I actually saw the New Jersey shoot the first time she came on the gun line in late September 30th.
Wow.
September 30th, '68. Yeah, she had just come on the gun line off the Van High River up there.
Oh, wow.
Well, definitely, I want to talk a little, obviously, about the movie, but and also your service too, because it's really so interesting. But for David, did all of that experience, how did that influence or shape you going into the service? Was that a thing, or had you already made up your mind at that point? And
No, pre
Me.
Dennis, when they opened the wall, what was that, 82, I made my father drag me down there. Like, we got to go to the wall, Dad.
Yeah.
By then I was like, it was all about Vietnam. I needed to know everything. I want to meet the guys that were there. And I remember going to the wall, and there was like this bivouac set up, and there's this old, he was probably in his 30s back then. But, he was a Marine, and I had a Marine T-shirt on. I wanted to be a Marine, and he looked at me and said, you want to be a Marine? And I said, yes, sir, And so, all that stuff, and then finally meeting Dennis, went to college for a couple of years, had a really great time at the University of Wisconsin. And
watch out!
Did you go to school there?
Nice. No,
my
dad
she's a
did.
cheesehead.
Oh, okay.
I am a Wisconsin
You're
native.
bad.
I did
what
not know
town?
we had that.
Small world.
I was born in Milwaukee, but
Okay.
grew up in a town called Minocqua.
Yeah, I've heard of that town.
It's very small.
So anyway, I like to say I drank my way into the Navy, which probably was, worse than Wisconsin. It was worse than Wisconsin, but I had discipline, and you don't realize it when you go to boot camp that you're going to use everything you learned in boot camp for the rest of your life. So after the Navy, I got out, went back to school at Southern Connecticut for communications, TV production, but I was motivated, and I always stayed in touch with him after. I mean, I used to go to your house in the summer.
Had dinner at our house.
Yeah, I'd pop in. I mean, I have pictures of his kids when they were just babies running around the yard.
Yeah.
But we always stayed in touch, and when I had him in class, I had read stories about Vietnam where veterans were starting to go back there, and this is 1987, 88. So I asked him the question in class one day during that 2-week period. I said, Mr. Mannion, I'm reading about these veterans going back to Vietnam. Would you ever go back if you could? He said, I wouldn't go back unless I could stand on Hill 861 again at Khe Sanh. And he's like, and nobody can go there yet. So that's how I opened my original film in 2000. I did
That was the
Walk in
question.
the Clouds. That's how I open it. In 1987, I asked my high school English teacher a question. Given the opportunity, would you go back to Khe Sanh? Vietnam? And you said,
the answer is
yeah.
only if I could go, and then
stand on
32
Hill 8.
years later,
Yeah.
we
The
went
student who
halfway.
asked him that question is going back to Vietnam with him, and that's how it started. And I'm leaving a lot of stuff out, but after the Navy, after school, started working at ESPN. Migrated to Los Angeles, worked at Fox Sports for years, then got into the entertainment side at DirecTV Entertainment and started doing, producing behind-the-scenes stuff for different shows we were doing, dramas, comedies, documentaries, cutting trailers, producing trailers. And that actually really prepared me for what I was going to do in the future for The Gift. But doing his documentary in 2000 was kind of the training ground for what laid ahead in the future.
It is a remarkable film. It really
It
is.
really
It's 55 minutes, and some of the footage from 2000 is in the 2023 three one.
Yeah,
But-
I used some of the footage.
But even that other one is really remarkable for the orphanages and the kids and the smiles.
Yeah,
And the Vietnamese officer who we had
Right.
in that 55-minute documentary, we're all on screen with that guy for 5 or 6 minutes. Talking about he was.
I thought that was
engineer at
incredible to sit there. You know, we're in Way City, right outside the Citadel.
Just see the bullet holes in the wall right
Yeah.
there at the Citadel, right
And
down the street from the Citadel.
Dennis and the 3 other Marines were sitting around this table with this former NVA guy.
Yeah.
And that's when it dawned on me. I'm like, wow, because you never think about the other side. I'm like, this guy is going through the same stuff mentally as these guys. And it was like they were happy to see each other because they understood each other.
Mm-hmm.
They had fought against each other. And, I mean, God, the NVA lost thousands of Khe-Sanh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They did.
And that guy was there. I was like, this is
There was
incredible.
an engineer there.
Yeah, it is incredible. I went back. I've been back twice. My mom is Vietnamese. She left in '75. I guess she arrived in '75, but they left right before the fall. And so we all went back as a family in 2001. So we got home in August of 2001. Anyhow, and our cyclo driver, I think we were in Hanoi.
Right.
Our cyclo driver, and for those who don't know, the cyclo is basically just a bicycle with a huge basket on the front, and it's sort of a bicycle taxi. And so I got to talking to him, and I was an active duty Marine at the time, so I had the look, and he was, he spoke English, which was was new. Vietnam at the time hadn't made this sort of mercurial move toward the West like it is now. And so I was like, oh, my God, you speak English? He goes, yeah. I was like, I was actually a officer in the South Vietnamese military. I was an infantryman. I was like, holy. And so we got to talking. And so I end up giving him, he was my cyclo driver the whole time that we were there in Hanoi, which was just a few days. But he couldn't, because he was repatriatized.
Couldn't get a job.
Yeah.
Couldn't get it. This is,
Couldn't own property.
even as a taxi driver, he only had a license to get the cyclo. They wouldn't even allow him to get a car to be a cab
We met a
driver.
lot of those
And he
guys.
had to sleep in that because he had no home. He couldn't own
he
property.
was shit on
Yeah, they were. Yeah,
constantly.
Glenn told us that too. Yeah.
Fuck, and it was gnarly. And he was, like I said, he was a battalion commander in the South Vietnamese military. Spent almost a decade in a repatriatism camp, and this is the best he could do.
Whoever was the Joint Chiefs back in 2000 time period, I met a cyclo driver like that, and he was a South Vietnamese Army. He actually worked alongside whoever the Joint Chiefs was back then. And I'm like, really? And I didn't know if he was telling me the truth until the next day. Because sometimes these guys will stick with you for a few days if you're in Saigon or Hue or whatever. He comes back with pictures of himself and the guy that who is now a general. And I thought that was amazing. But, they can't get any jobs.
So that's why I was like,
Can't own
all right,
property.
dude, you're my guy.
Yeah.
This is our schedule, which, looking back, bad OPSEC. But I was like, here's our schedule.
Right.
Just meet me here at these times, dude, and, like, this money is yours. And if you ghost on me, fuck it, man, take the money, because, I just felt so awful for him. Sure. And, like, all my uncles were in the medical corps. Right. One of them was a paratrooper. And so, they were all tight, and fuck, I could go on and on, but gnarly stuff. So I guess, David, just to shift gears a little bit, so you mentioned the gift, and I really just got to ask you too, like, do you have an Eagle Glow and Anchor up your butt or something? Because these movies that you're making, like your proximity to these unbelievable,
so eloquent,
these unbelievable stories. And so, really, what I want to get at is like, we all know folks that have really cool stories and are amazing people, but we don't have that vision to recognize that there's a story here, but yet you do. Like, has that always been a thing for you? Like, you're just so, you can see the compelling side of the human aspect of people that you meet, or like, what is it about you?
I think that came along later. I mean, I've always been interested in, I've been like a big people watcher since I was a kid. My mom would go to the grocery store and leave me in the front seat, right in front of the grocery store.
You could do that then.
You
could do that then and not get in trouble. And I'm 10 years old, but I would just sit there and look at people as they came walking out the door and study them. I just found that fascinating to study people like that. And then later on, I started to, I was the guy at the party, like, well, so where are you from? Where did you grow up? And it's like I'm interviewing them, and I don't even know I'm doing it. Mm-hmm. So, and then when I get locked into something like Vietnam, I need to go all in. You know, I'm like, I need to go there. I need to go up on that hill. I need to go, you know. And then we went in 2001. He wasn't with us, but we went up to 881 South with Bob Arata. But it was, and I fell in love with that country. You know, the stories there, whether it was the French people I met that were there, or the Vietnamese, or other Vietnam veterans who were there. I don't know. It's just, it's fascinating to me. I've always been attracted to, not so much, you know, the middle of war, what's going on now, but the aftermath.
Yeah.
And how that affects people, you know.
And the real irony is that he was sitting on an airplane next to Jason Dunn.
That's what I'm saying.
That's the only
yeah.
reason.
Yeah.
I
That's
mean,
what I'm saying.
Otherwise,
but I mean, like, how many of us have done
been.
that? And then that was it. Like, hey,
Yeah.
that was a super cool little, you know, young Marine.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll tell people about that interaction, but like, you saw that there's something else there that like needs to be told. That's an unbelievable trait.
With Jason, you know, that was a chance meeting that, you know, I didn't know it at the time. I just saw this kid who just was a solid person, you know. I try to explain it to people. I said, it's like going to that party, you meet somebody, and you're like, you don't want the night to end. Like, this dude's awesome. I want to hang out with this dude. You know, and it's a 4-hour plane ride. And he was so nonchalant about his deployment. But I was, like, worried. Like, you know, this guy's a great guy. I hope he's going to be okay. Mm-hmm. And I still remember him. I shook his hand and said, hey, man, take care of yourself. He just kind of smiled, walked off. And I remember standing there just watching him, thinking, man, what a great kid. And then, you know, when I found out he passed 6 months later, it was, I don't know, it affected me in a profound way. It was just like, man, not that kid. You know? And I wasn't even thinking about documentaries, you know? That didn't come till later. And it was probably because of a lot of the Kniess guys I knew who heard the story. And at that point, I didn't even know what he'd done. You know, I just knew that this young Marine was a casualty of war, and he was gone, and I felt like shit. You know, I was like hurt. I was like, man, you know. So, you know, it wasn't until years later, as I got to know all his Marines, and we'd sit down at night drinking beer till 2 a.m, and these guys would just start opening up and telling me these things. And I just kind of filed that stuff away. So, but, you know, by 2020, I was like, man, I need to tell his story. People don't even know about this kid, you know? So that's when I kind of made the decision to do it. And I think, you know, working at DirecTV Entertainment as a behind-the-scenes producer, you learn the trade craft of it, you know, how to interview someone, what to say, what not to say. And it really, it prepared me for, and then, you know, knowing all the Kniess guys, especially prepared me to be able to sit down with someone who's gone through combat, you know, how to be sympathetic. And because for me, it wasn't a job. It wasn't, you know, some guys coming in off the street to sit down and do an interview because they're doing this documentary for HBO. They knew while I was there, you know, my heart was in it. And after doing The Gift, I said, I don't ever want to work on something ever again where my heart's not in it, because I've already done that in Hollywood for years. So, you know, I really owe Dennis and Glenn and Bob and Paul a great, you know, a great thank you for letting me learn how to really sit down with guys who've gone to war, you know.
And Trent at the museum years ago spoke to that large group of people.
Yeah.
And he didn't name me, but he said he went back to Kaisan with his English teacher, and those Marines trusted him, and that allowed these Kilo Marines
You're talking about Trent Gibson.
Yeah, it was for a premiere at the
Mhm.
museum
Yeah,
in 22.
He made that. David sent me the copy.
Yeah.
It's remarkable.
Yeah, it was.
Came right over and shook his hand.
Yeah, yeah, I have that
You were
video.
introducing a trailer for The Gift, I think, or a part of it, or
Yeah, what was the premiere? We were doing it was a premiere event, you know. But Commandant was there, everybody was there.
But he made references to
Vietnam.
The four of us.
Yeah.
You know.
And he really nailed it. You know, he said, you know, this isn't the first time David has sat down with Marines and got to hear what they have to say. He did a thing 20-something years ago about his teacher, Dennis Mannion, who's a Kaisan Marine. So, yeah, that really prepared me for all that stuff.
And that trip was 2 weeks. But I should say that we were at Kniess only for 4 days. So David was with us for 2 weeks.
2 weeks in Vietnam.
Talking to us in restaurants and at night.
We got arrested.
Outside. We got arrested.
No shit.
Yeah, we were detained for like 3 days in Dong Ha.
Well, because
no, because
we went hiking up on 861, and we weren't supposed to do that.
But if you watch the documentary, he did a little bit of poetic license there.
Yeah.
We got arrested for giving out vitamins and stuff to the kids in the
Mountain
orphanages,
yards.
which Glenn said when we were going, you have to bring a suitcase filled with pens and pencils and medicine, and because we're going to hand them out to people. Years later, he would just say to people, "I need this amount of money from you so I can buy stuff over there on the market to support the markets."
Yeah,
and so we didn't get arrested then, but you'll see that in the film if you do watch it at some point. But we got arrested when we came back off the hills because we'd gone up there without a guide, without a permit. And we stayed overnight. Some of us stayed overnight.
Yeah, let me explain that because
wait, and if I could give a little bit, because you had mentioned before we started recording that it was just you and a camera. Like, we're not talking about a team.
No, there's no crew.
Yeah,
it
was just a camera on a
the most
pole.
expensive, SD prosumer camera you could buy back then was like this Sony TRV-9 something, and it was like
digital
almost
was just
$3,000,
coming out.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, if
But
I
back
had
then,
this
right?
iPhone today, I could have done a great job, right?
Yeah.
So. Yeah, it's just me and these 4 Marines, right? And we had Lan Ann, who was our interpreter, who actually lives in the U.S. now. She's in Texas, which blows my mind that, I had dinner with her a couple years back. But, yeah, so we get to Khe Sanh, and, it's just a village in the middle of nowhere in the, Central Highlands. And we set out in the morning, and it's overcast, drizzling, and it's probably, a 5-mile hike from where we got dropped off through the jungle. And it's kind of, slowly, gradually going up in elevation. And at a certain point, and Paul was with us, he was a heavy smoker, so he'd be stopping to have cigarettes. Dennis got ahead of us, and so I would run up to Dennis. How you doing? You good? Drink water? Okay. And then I would run back. Paul, you all right? He's sitting on the ground smoking a cigarette. He's, yeah, Bubba. I'm good. And then I run up to him again. I'm like, hey, man, if something happens to him out here, there's no medevac. We're going to have to carry him out. So anyway, at one point, Dennis says, I'm just going to go up and see what's around the bend. And he was gone. Like, I had binoculars, and I'm like, holy crap, man. He's like a mile ahead of us. I could see him going.
I wasn't a mile, but I was at way
You were pretty far. I could see him going up because he had a red pack on from the 70s.
Yeah.
And I could see the side of the hill. He's just going up the trail.
Because that was the actual approach to 861.
Yeah.
That was the, I literally was within
That was your
100
patrol route to get in.
Yeah.
Well, at one point we came across, probably halfway up, we came across an old fighting position, Marine Corps fighting position. And he just started digging out of the ground where the Montagnards had been looking for metal or whatever. And,
plastic spoons, and
plastic sea ration junk,
the cellophane bags from sea rations.
And I was blown away by that. And there was unexploded ordnance everywhere.
Right.
As long as you stayed on the trail,
because
they ran cattle up there, or cows and stuff.
So he finally makes it to the top, and then I bring the other 3 guys up, and I just remember crossing the hill. There's a big trench line, all grown in with elephant grass. I had to go in it and then come up. I'm cresting the top 861, and there he is. He comes walking over, and I put out my hand, and I said, hey, you made it. And he just looked at me and buried his head in my chest and started crying.
Wow.
Oh, man.
And he just kept, I was crying too. And he said, I should have died. He just kept saying, I should have died here. I should have died here.
Fucking hell.
And my wife would always say, why did you say should? Like you deserve to die? And I said, no, I didn't mean it that way. I meant should. And I can't believe I didn't.
Yeah.
That's that kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's when he became Dennis.
Yeah.
It wasn't Mr. Mannion anymore. I tell people that trip started out, I'm going on a trip with Mr. Mannion. By that point, it was Dennis, because I was living.
I mean, I stood standing right in the depression in the ground that had been my bunker.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, that was my bunker. And
yeah, so we went over to, he showed me, he's like, here's my bunker. And I remember all the pictures from high school. He's like, remember the pictures, right? There's the bomb crater. And I turn around, I'm like, Jesus Christ, I can't believe I'm standing here. He's like, there's the big boulder, right? From the pictures I've showed you.
the wire. Yeah.
And he turned around, he said, that's my bunker right there. I couldn't believe it. I was like, holy shit.
But it was the nature of the job, too. I was a Fort observer, so I had a map. And, even on the hill, I wasn't just a regular grunt moving along behind somebody else. I that was my job, to know the hills and know so that's part of it.
And he started cutting away all the elephant grass. He
I brought
had
a pair of gloves with me.
K-bar knife, and he's just, for an hour, he just cut it all out.
And at a certain point, and it's in the film, I was cutting, and then I realized there was an M26 grenade right there, unexploded, in the mud.
I piled rocks around it. I was like, hey, man. And the whole cap of it was just corroded.
Yeah, I just
was
said,
like, this thing could go
But there's loud fart's going to set this thing off. Yeah.
But there's the soles of combat boots laying everywhere, spent rounds, AK
flak
rounds.
jacket, particle.
Well, I mean, speaking
rounds.
of souls, you had an experience.
Yeah.
Right?
So we went up, the whole group went up, let's just say day one. We got there, so now it's day two, and we went up, and it was mist and rain and the backpacks, and we're going to spend the night there, and then the ambitious plan was to go from there 3,000 meters to the west to go to 881 South, where Baba Rada and Glenn Prentice had been. But during the afternoon was a typhoon that had broken up over inland India and coming over the Himalayas, and it wasn't hellacious, but it was raining hard. We had set up a couple of tents, and then some people decided they were going back. And I'm in the tent with David, which Joan and I had used backpacking Europe 20 years before. It was filled with holes. It was just, and he said, I have to leave. I have to leave.
Yeah, I had the camera gear. Half my body's out in the elephant grass. I got leeches crawling all over me. And the other half's in the tent, and I'm holding the camera, and I'm like, man, I think I need to go.
Some of the other
come back in the morning.
Yeah. So some of the other people left. Paul Knight left. His son left. He didn't want to, but his son left to go back down.
And it was getting dark.
Donna Elliott went, and so it was just Glenn, Bob, and myself and Leona in one tent, and we spent the night. And then in the morning, the weather was worse, so we walked back down. And we retraced the same steps, and when we got down to the road, the van was there, or at some point the van came by.
Vietnamese Army.
And they said, you have to,
AKs.
You're going to get arrested. You're going to get arrested. We've been arrested. You have to go to the police station. And so we did. We turned in our passports at the police station, and then he said, these will be in Dong Ha 2 days from now. So you can't get on a train or a plane over there as a foreigner without a passport. So we were, in a sense, arrested in that way. And then we still had 2 more days of Khe Sanh. So Glenn Prentice said, well, sir, can Bob and I and maybe Dave, could we, not David, that's a year later, but he said, can we go back to 881 South because we didn't get to go there? He said, well, if you fill out this form and you pay this, And I said, can I go back to 861? And he said, what for? And I said, I really want to say goodbye to people. And he said, okay. And David said, I'll go with you. So we got up at 4 in the morning, and we hired 2 kids with their little motorbikes. They're taking us. I'm in the lead. Well,
it was pouring.
It was pouring rain. His kid turns off because you got to get gas at a little store. Not even a store. It's a house, and you pay there's a dong. And then David said, I can't do it. So he left. So when I went back, he dropped me off at the trailhead. I waited 10 minutes. I had no idea where David was. And I thought, well, I'm here. I need to go. And so that's when I went back up.
And then what did you experience?
So I was the only person on 861. The rain had let up. There was this mist and clouds were blowing up over the hill coming from the west. Eerily silent except for birds, which was unusual to see birds, to hear bird sounds and chirping. And I poked around and I found part of a flak jacket, which I kept and brought home, and a plastic spoon from sea rations. And I had those pieces of blessed palm, which I had prepared the year before at my church. And so I stood at the very top and I said an Our Father, and then I just read each name and I let them go different directions, wherever they went, one at a time, their name and the day they died, and then I let it go. And ironically, Lieutenant Fordham's is the one that came right back and landed almost right near my boot.
Jeez.
But I let it stay right where it landed. I didn't want to pick it up again. And then I moved from there back to the landing zone, the original landing zone, so you could look up. And I was getting stuff into my pack, and I looked up, and I could see figures that seemed to be standing right there in the mist, and some had ponchos on. It was kind of a loose military. It wasn't a formation. It was just a group, and their clothes were moving, and their ponchos were moving, and I blinked away and blinked, and I looked back up, and I could still see them. Who knows? Over imagination, I don't know, but I thought I I thought I saw what I was seeing. So finally, I stuffed everything in my pack. I looked up and I did a salute, and I'm not much for salutes. And I turned and never looked back. And when I got down, everybody else was in the van getting ready to go to Dong Ha. We were leaving, and I went right to the back of the van, and I sat there. And David turned around at one point and said, "You look like you've seen a ghost." Mm-hmm. And I said, "I think I did." And then I was silent until we got to Dong Ha.
Yeah.
And then we were 2 days there until they went from $1,000. Barbarata, who was single and didn't have any kids, he was willing to pay $1,000. Says, "Fuck that, we're not going to pay $1,000, you know."
Yeah, it was a shakedown.
So it was a shakedown. And then after that, they interviewed us in groups. They interviewed us individually.
Yeah.
They gave Leanne a real hard time because
she's a translator, right?
Yeah, it was really. And then
she was scared. She was crying.
they eventually reduced it down to like $100.
40.
No,
Right.
well, no, 100, and we agreed to that.
It was like a negotiation.
So then we got in the van to go to the police station, and we got there, and the guy said, the colonel said, "You've been so honest with us, we're going to reduce it to 40."
Yeah.
So we each paid 40.
All that
Well,
for
there was
$40.
a little bit of threatening stuff before that
Well,
happened.
Glenn had called his congressman on a
guy,
satellite phone. He said,
Yeah, Glenn had told this colonel, whoever he was, he told the translator, he's like, "Listen, you tell this guy everything I'm going to say." He's like, "You tell him if he doesn't let us go, I'm going to go next door and call my congressman in California, who's going to call Washington. Washington is going to call the U.S. Embassy in Hanoi, and the officials in Hanoi are going to call him and wonder why you're harassing Americans when my president just signed a trade agreement 2 weeks ago with your country to help you." And the kid's like, "I can't say that." He's like, "No, you tell him." So he told him. The guy got pissed. It was like the Paris Peace
but that's
Accords,
really
big
what it
table.
Oh my gosh.
So they all got up and left to save face, and then they came back and said, "Okay."
But from work, he had a satellite phone, which was a rare thing then.
Sure.
And years later, I taught in Wallingford, and New England Prep School is Choate Rosemary Hall. And it's in the same town as the two high schools, the public schools. And I knew the people there, and I coached there for a while. And at one point, one of the history teachers invited me to sit at a dinner because they had the first ambassador was a POW, had been in Hanoi, and now he had been appointed by Clinton to be the ambassador. So he spoke to the entire student body, and then there was a dinner afterwards, and I went and sat at a big table. And so my teacher buddy at Choate said to this guy, I think it's Pete Post or something like that. He said, "Dennis was just in Vietnam 2 years ago," and the guy, and he told the story, and the guy slapped the table. He goes, "God damn it!" He said, "I told those people that they had to stop shaking Americans down." He said, "I sent a message down from Hanoi after that incident."
No kidding.
To tell him to stop harassing Americans.
So he knew about it.
He knew about it. Yeah.
Yeah, Glenn called it.
Yeah, he
first
did
he
call
called his wife and said, "Hey, if you don't hear from me tomorrow, call Congressman so-and-so."
Unbelievable.
And
He
didn't call
topic.
her. So
Way off
she called the
topic.
congressman, and then it just went down the chain. And Glenn said they had been tracking us, and they finally caught up with us, and we had just left the country to come back to the States. Yeah. So I thought that was funny that he went to
And
that
I thought
dinner.
it was a dead issue until 2 years later.
Right.
I'm sitting at a dinner at Choate Rosemary
What?
Hall with the former ambassador.
But there's a lot. There used to. I don't think it's like that anymore.
No.
It's pretty open now. There, and it didn't feel like a communist country back then.
We didn't see one frown in the 2 weeks we were there. Not one frown from
Everybody
anybody.
was
No,
smiling.
I had
No one.
similar because everyone knew I was everybody knew I was a service member.
Right.
Once I told, and that was one of the things I thought was really interesting when I said that I was a Marine. The amount of people that came out, and so I could just tell that at least generationally, as it's getting passed on, that the people had, and I think it's because of the Combined Action Program, the CAP, things that you guys were doing, that there was a genuine sense that like Marines are at least here to help in the way that Marines see that. And there was a real love, it seemed like, for Marines, because no one was there to like, "Hey, I really love you, give me money." They would just like, it seemed very authentic and genuine, their appreciation.
And the
for
word we
being a
heard from
Marine.
Leanne and some of the others was that they really resented the Russians when the Russians were there. Because they moved in after we were gone, and they didn't like them at all. They nickel and dimed them and mistreated them, and they couldn't wait for Americans to come back. And finally, when Clinton opened it up, and we started going back.
Yeah. No, that's so fascinating.
Well, so what is that like as a teacher? I mean, I think one of the things people don't really talk about often enough with teachers is that it's not just the academic material. It's the fact that a good teacher who makes a connection with a student can change their life. What is that like for you to see the impact you've had on just this one particular student and how he has taken your story? And I know that couldn't have been easy to trust somebody with your stories, because once it's out of your hands, it's out of your hands. What is that like now to see that?
It is very rewarding for sure. No question about it. And David's been on me to write forever, but I've just dragged my feet. So in a way, he took over telling my story in that sense. But it is gratifying. And I think part of the job, at least I don't know about math teachers, but at least with English teachers, you are going to teach the curriculum, but you're talking about life and life skills, and and that's why I taught deliverance, honestly, because the last word in deliverance is that the river has been dammed up and it's now a lake where they had all that trouble in deliverance. This is the book, and they show it in the movie too. And then the last sentence in the book is the lake has become a real popular place for students just getting out of high school to hang around. The last words in deliverance are high school kids, and I'm thinking, well, I'm teaching high school kids, they need to read this book. It's challenges and how you're going to how you're going to deal with this. And it doesn't have to be the sexual stuff, but there's challenges out there, and I always say you didn't like Burt Reynolds' character because he was a big macho guy, but when the scene takes place, the only guy you want out there with a bow and arrow is Burt Reynolds' character, Lewis Medlock. You don't want any of those other guys, the musician or the scientist, that's the way it is. But all those books and all that stuff, and I do get feedback from other people, but David is the...
And is that what drew you, that connection that Nancy's referring to, that drew you to teaching after you got out?
I didn't think about it. No. Well,
interesting.
Very quick story. When I got out, I went to UConn, but I was commuting to stores from Meriden, Connecticut. I was married the first time, and I was commuting, and I made the dean's list the first semester. And my counselor called me in. He said, "You did a great job." I said, "I'm a different person." He said, "Are you sure you want to major in English?" And I said, "Yeah, those are the only courses that came from South Bend, all those 4 English courses." And he said, "Well, you're in the School of Liberal Arts, you have to take a language." I said, "I didn't say you got to be fucking kidding me, but that's what I wanted."
He's like, "How's that language for you?"
And he said, "Well, that's not the bad news." I said, "Well, it can't be worse than that." He goes, "Yeah, it's a 5-credit course. It meets 5 days a week. You have to take either French or Spanish." And I said, I'm married. I'm working in a deli on Tuesday and Thursday and Saturdays, and I'm commuting to stores and back and forth, and I can't do it." And he said, "Well, there's no way out of it." I appealed. Over a 2-week period, I appealed it up through the department to the president of the university, and they wouldn't let me out of it. And so 2 weeks into the semester, or that second semester, I was in a classroom, and it said, "English majors. Language requirement got you depressed. School of Education requires no teachers." So,
well, there you go.
I walked over and said to some kid, "Where's that?" And he said, "That's that building up there." And I went in and saw the secretary, sign me up. And now, if you don't have an A average coming out of high school in Connecticut, you can't get in the School of Education.
No shit. That's awesome.
Cannot.
Yeah, that's good.
But they signed me up.
Yeah.
And then I did my English courses, and instead of taking earth science and film and shit like that, I had to take the education courses. And at the end, I student taught near where I was living in Meriden, Platt High School. And I did well, I guess. I had an affinity for kids. I had good-sized arms and shoulders as well. But also... But I wasn't applying for jobs because I didn't want to be a teacher. And then the athletic director was in the teacher's room, one of the rare times I ever went in there, the last day of my being there. Still have 3 weeks before I graduate. And he said, "Have you filled out a lot of applications?" And I said, "No." He said, "Why not?" I said, "I didn't want to take fucking Spanish." And he said, "Well, Sheehan High School just opened up 2 years ago. It's the next town down, and they're looking for an English teacher and a football coach. I think you should go call this guy." I called Peril Marinella.
Man.
I interviewed the next day.
That's awesome.
And that's where you went to high school?
That's where I went to high school.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you were
That's
there 30
amazing.
years?
30 years. Yeah, I
God.
bought 35 is full, which my
Yeah.
wife did, but I bought 3 for the Marines and got out. But yeah, I mean, I wasn't planning on being a teacher. And the only reason,
Oh, my
and the only
gosh.
reason Joan was at that school is because she was scheduled to start as a fresh, brand new school, 1971, and the teacher at the middle school had applied for the position, got it. Joan hadn't been hired yet, and he got drafted.
Oh,
He got drafted. So he left, and there was an opening. So the Albertus Magnus, the Wallingford, she in high school called around to all the local schools. Do you know anybody in the English who majored in English who could? And Joan got the job. She didn't want the job either, but she got it. So that's how it's all that.
Amazing.
Meant to
All
be.
those little
Just
meant to
meant
be's,
to
I
be.
guess.
Yeah. Wow.
It's amazing.
And amazing, really, to think about how many lives you've impacted as a teacher.
I said to Joan recently, at the end when David films myself and our grandson Jamie, one of our grandkids, and he intersplices that with kids from the
Vietnam.
2000. You know,
Yeah,
those
yeah.
were kids at Khe-Sanh themselves. And I said to Joan, you know, when Jamie is a father or a grandfather, well, and I'm long gone, he can show this to his kids.
Yeah.
And Joan said, Dennis, it could be in our family generation for 100 years.
Mm-hmm.
They'd see Jamie walking around in the yard and say, hey, that was my great-great-grandfather.
Well, and I think that was the thing, and you know, I these notes wipe my ass with them.
Just becomes a conversation at some point.
So the thing about it that's just so striking to me now, David, what you do, and then obviously Dennis, you just hit the nail on the head. Is the things that you're doing have generational impact. I mean, because you could say the same thing for the gift. I mean, you start off with that young man riding the bike. And talk. I mean, fuck, man. I'm gonna start.
Joan couldn't get past
I can't
that.
chop onions when I do these damn interviews. I'm gonna fucking start crying, dude. Like, how does I don't even
by the
know
way.
what the question is here, but like, what does that mean to you? Like, how does that?
You know,
Or do you even fully understand?
yeah,
the
I do.
impact?
I
Okay.
do. And you know, back in 2022, the museum reached out to me and offered to do our premiere at the theater there. I don't know who talked to him. They just reached out to. I was like, wow, that's like perfect. The Medal of Honor Theater, right? So we went there. All the Marines came out for it. All the Kilo guys, Trent, everybody. And after the screening, you know, and there were generals there. The guy behind me, I can't remember his name, real gruff guy. He had like tears in his eyes. But afterwards, I went out into the lobby, and Kelly Miller was the first one. He just came, and he's a big guy. He was there with Jason when the grenade went off. He just ran over and picked me up off the ground and just hugged me. And he just, you know. And then Deb came out, and she came over crying and hugged me. And she said, thank you for letting me hear my son's voice for the first time in 17 years or 18 years. And then Dan stepped up, gave me a hug, and said, there's a reason why you met my son. And I just watched it. And
Yeah, well, that's true.
I just thought to myself, this is what it's about. This is why I did this, you know. Some filmmakers do it because of, you know, oh, I just want to tell this story, or, you know, I want to be successful. Because I firmly believe you'll be successful the minute you don't care about where that thing's going and your heart's in it, you know. So for me, those three compliments, Kelly Miller, Deb and Dan Dunham, for me, that was the greatest gift that I could ever achieve for that film, because that's why I did it, you know. And I love those people. I love all those Marines. But Dan and Deb, you know, and I talk to them all the time still.
Well, and all that comes through in the way you tell stories.
Oh God,
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's
It's
a
a hard
reason
watch.
why.
It's a hard watch. And, you know, what you guys have seen, that 90 minutes is actually a 5-part series.
Yeah, it's 5 parts.
You know, which
5 hours.
I can't talk about right now, but I'm talking to somebody to try and get that released
Thank goodness.
soon.
That would be amazing.
Yeah,
But once that does happen, I'll let you guys know, because that really takes a deep dive.
sure.
You know, you get to learn about all those Marines.
Right.
I spent a lot of time, especially Jason Sanders from Oklahoma. You know, I don't know if you remember in The Gift, he's the one that talks about, you know, after that grenade went off and I tried to help Jason and that insurgent stood up. He's like, we looked at each other and it was like, I'm about to kill you, dude. And his look was like, I know you're about to kill me. He's like, and I just dumped a whole mag into him. That interview was probably the most incredible interview out of all of them, because he really, like, you know, his wife came up to me afterwards and said, I can't believe he told you all those things, because he's never talked about any of that stuff with me. So she was there listening. So, and that was the other beautiful thing about The Gift, was it was therapeutic in a way for not just the Marines, but their wives, some of the kids, because they hadn't heard the stories. They didn't know why Dad was quiet or Dad was angry or Dad was sad, you know. So when these guys, even the Marines, would do the interview, it was always the same. It was like, man, I needed that, you know. And they would thank me. I'm like, well, you know, don't thank me, man, you know. So it was, and I was worried about that when I first started that. It was like, am I opening up a can of worms that shouldn't be open? Is this going to do any harm more than good?
Yeah.
But after I interviewed Ferguson, he was the first one. He came up to me and said, man, thanks. I really needed to talk about that. And I was like, oh, wait a minute. This is actually a good thing.
Well, and that's part of what makes you so good at telling these kinds of stories, because you do care. If you do care, you're not just a combat
What the
voyeur.
repercussions are
You
going to be.
care how it's going to affect someone to tell your story.
And, you know, even today, like, I'll be on Instagram and it's like, oh, we lost so-and-so today. I don't know who that Marine is. It's usually a Marine. It could be Army, but anybody. I don't even know that person, but I understand that, and I feel it. I feel bad, you know, because there's been quite a few Kilo guys since I started that Gift thing that, you know, have committed suicide, and that's affected me. And these are guys I'd met and known, you know, and it's just a terrible thing. So when I see someone else who I don't know, I'm like, man, you know, so.
But talking about it, telling the story can be very therapeutic.
Yeah, that was quite. I mean, the Vietnam thing was an amazing experience that put me in a weird place afterwards. Like, I went back to L.A. and I didn't care about anything. I was just like, I didn't want to talk to anybody. I didn't want to, you know, see my friends. I just wanted to go up to the Sierras and go camping for a week and just be alone.
But he did go back the following year.
Oh, I went back 5 or 6 times after that.
Yeah, but you went back with Glenn and Bob.
Yeah, and we went up 881 South.
They went to 881 South.
Where Captain Bill Dabney was the CO. He was married to Chesty Puller's daughter.
Oh,
Virginia,
sure.
was that her name?
Yeah.
Yes.
Is she still alive?
Virginia. No, she passed away a couple
passed
years
away.
ago.
So I met all those guys over the years at
And
reunions.
When he was going back, I said to Joan, Dave's going back with Glenn and Bob to go to 881 South, and she went,
we had no trouble this time.
you're not going.
Yeah. We called him, though.
But I know.
We called him from the hill. We were up there. He had the sat phone
Had
again.
Called me.
And we talked to him from 881 South. And that's a very historical place, because at the end of the siege, these guys all got to 881 South, and they're, you know, online, the whole battalion, right?
Well, India stayed back, but the other 3 companies assaulted 881 North on Easter Sunday, the 14th of
April 14th, which ironically
Online.
is the day that Jason Dunham jumped on a grenade, April 14th.
Yeah.
And
All
we
those
just celebrated
Chills.
the anniversary of his death was the 22nd, just a couple days ago.
Yeah.
So there's that connection there, you know.
Can I give you one more? I know this is probably off the podcast, but it's
No,
so
please.
We're not on Facebook, my wife and I. We're on Instagram because of our kids and our grandkids and friends like him. He's partly a friend. And then I kept getting 2 years ago a guy named Han Nogo, H-A-N Nogo.
He just reached out to me 2 days ago.
So I ignored it. You know, you get other requests. I don't need that, you know. So eventually David, maybe 6 months later, said, will you answer the guy? And John Marie, Paulin, the little kids, they both texted me and said, you know, emailed me. So I'm so glad I did. He speaks 5 languages. He doesn't smoke. Most Vietnamese men do. Mm-hmm. He's a marathon runner. He's a long-distance water swimmer. He rides bicycles on weekends with his buddies. He's married. He has 3 kids. He's remarkable. But he was an English teacher at Khe Sanh High School for 2 years, 1998 through 2000. And he he got hired for that. Whatever he had majored in English at the University of Saigon, and he got hired to teach advanced English at Khe Sanh High School. And when it was over, he got headhunted by a thing called Project Renew, founded by a Vietnam vet, infantry enlisted guy who's lived in Hanoi for the last 23 years. They're trying to demine and stabilize Quang Tri province, the most heavily bombed province of all the provinces in the war. So he works for them now. So he's asking. So I said to him, "So how did you find us?" He said, "Well, I taught there for 2 years. I've never spoken with him, just emails and text messages, I guess, on Instagram." And he said, "I taught there for 2 years. I never went out to the battlefield. I could see the two mountains in the distance, but I never went. I just was, I did my job. I would go back to Dong Ha on the weekend." And he said, but 3 or 4 years ago, he started thinking about it and his country and his history. And so he started looking things up. One of the first things he found was his film, Khe Sanh, A Walk in the Clouds. And he's in his house in Dong Ha, and he's waiting for his daughter to get off the laptop so he can watch. So when all the kids go to bed, he's up on the laptop. And in that time period, in 4 days at Khe Sanh, there were 2 kids hanging around. They were practicing their English with us. They walked with us to the market. They walked us to the police station, and they said goodbye to us at the end. He gets to that portion of the film. They were his students.
Yeah. Jeez, I knew you were going to.
Yeah.
What?
From 30 years before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he actually put me in touch with that one
of the kids in the film.
Yeah.
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 And I said to him very briefly, I said, so you live in Dong Ha? And he said, yes. And he said, I have 2 brothers. My oldest brother lives in Dong Ha. He takes care of my father. That culture, just like the Italians, a lot of cultures, Eskimos, they take care of the elders. And he said, my younger brother lives in Da Nang, and he's married and he has a couple of children. And I knew at that point that he was married and had these 3 kids. And I said, email back, what about your mother? And he said, she was a member of the Viet Cong in Quang Tri province. She fought against you guys. and he said she was 18 years old. She was in Hue, and the monks in 62. And the monks were burning themselves, protesting the government. She got arrested. She spent 4 years in a jail in Hue. Never went outside the gates of the jail, ever. And the day she got out, the next day she signed up for the Viet Cong.
Jeez.
And she, back and forth, and carried ammo, carried wounded guys, brought beans and rice up, and then eventually was wounded severely enough to go to Hanoi. And up in Hanoi, by then it was 70, and the war was winding down. We were gone, really, and then it ended in 75. And she met a government official up there. They fell in love. She said, I'd really like to live back in the Dong Ha area. And he said, sure. So that's where they raised their kids. And she died of a stroke in 2009. He sent me her photo. It's kind of beat up and all. David,
I cleaned it up.
He cleaned it up, and we sent it back
to
to him. It's beautiful. I'll show you tonight on my phone.
Okay.
Yeah, it's really remarkable, honest to God.
This whole thing is remarkable.
You know, he was talking about the Poulain family. I don't know a lot of people realize that whole Khe Sanh area was just coffee plantations for 100 years.
I didn't know that.
Was it Francois?
No, so
who's the father?
The father was Eugene, and he was in the French army in World War I when it was Indochina. He was a botanist and biologist. He stayed. When the war ended in 1918 or whenever it was over there, he stayed, and he traveled around the country looking, and he identified all kinds of plants that had never been identified before. They're in the Louvre now. You can read his name with his little descriptions of them. And he established a coffee plantation at Khe Sanh because of the weather and the red soil.
And it's still a plantation.
It's still plantations there now. And he eventually, he never was married, but he had relationships with 2 different Vietnamese women and had a number of children. And one of them was his son Felix, who actually went back to France when he was 17 or 18. And then his father wrote to him and said, would you be willing to come back? I need someone to manage the coffee plant, the plantation. So he came back. And the father was ambushed on Route 9 coming back from Dong Ha on his Jeep because they thought, the Viet Minh thought that the colonel in the South Vietnamese Army was in a Jeep. They shot his Jeep up and he died.
Jeez.
The kids lost him. So they lost their grandfather. So Felix and Madeline had Francoise, the older girl, and they had the boy Jean-Marie. And I saw them I only saw the girl for 10 seconds on a patrol off when we were before we went to 861. It was just before Christmas '67. We went across Route 9 to the east and up in the mountains overnight. Came out by a different route, and there was a house in the middle of nowhere. Freaking house, 2 stories with a verandas, and we're walking single file going back to the combat base. And this is December, like 17th maybe, of '67. And there was a little girl sitting there on the steps of the house, and she was dressed in red. And as we walked by, she was waving to us. And when I got up next to her, from me to the wall out there, she wasn't Caucasian. She was Vietnamese. I mean, she wasn't Vietnamese. She was Caucasian.
Right.
And it was Francois. And I didn't learn until years later that she was the daughter of this couple, and that their grandfather had been killed, on an ambush.
Gosh.
They were told to leave the day after the siege began in January. It was 22nd, I think now. It's the 22nd or 23rd, and they made them go to Hue or get out of Khe Sanh because the fighting had started. Mm-hmm. At the end, in April, just before Easter Sunday, he talked to his wife in Hue at Phu Bai Airport, and he said, I talked to the Marines. They're going to fly me back to Khe Sanh tomorrow, Easter Saturday. And she said, why? And he said, I need to find out everything that's left in our crops and our Jeep and our Land Rover. And she said, oh, don't go. But he went, and the plane crashed, and he was the only one that died.
Oh,
they lost their father at Khe Sanh. And she took her kids and her deceased husband back to France and raised her kids there. And they were, at the 50th anniversary of the siege, they were our guests of honor in D.C. John Marie and, unbelievable.
Jeez,
and this guy is he and Noga is very involved in their lives. He's found the original house, the remains of the original house. Yeah, it's really, really cool thing.
It's incredible.
Seriously. I know we've gone on a long time. You want to talk about Lukman for just a quick second, if you got it?
Absolutely.
100%.
Yeah.
Let's. So, for our listeners who, last week, or I guess a couple days ago, we dropped the episode with Major General James Lukman. And he mentioned on 2 occasions, both of them extremely impassioned.
He did.
He mentioned
John Leary.
Yeah. And he said, and actually when Nancy asked him what his favorite day at the museum was, this is what he mentioned.
Yeah. And he said we needed to ask you about it.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about that. Yeah.
So when I got out of the Marines, I had 14 months left, and I came home, and then I went back to Lejeune, and I went to Cuba for 4 months. When I got back from Cuba, there was a Marine who had come in from Vietnam. John Leary was from New Jersey. I drove a Camaro. He drove a Mustang, so we were not really good friends. But
I drove a Mustang.
Well, then you could be real good friends with John. Great guy, absolute great guy, and from New Jersey. But he eventually, when he got out of the Marines, he moved out to California, and he was very successful in the things he did. And he worked really hard with getting Marines jobs when they were getting out of it. He worked a long time in that. When 9/11 happened, the company he was working for was responsible for upgrading all the cockpits in passenger airplanes. His company won that contract. He just told me that not too long ago. They
for
were
force protection.
So you could no longer get in the door of an airplane. Anyhow, so John, we've stayed in touch over the years, and it was about, I forgot what year it was, but one of his daughters, Shelley, she emailed me and she said, my dad's 60th birthday is coming up, or Christmas. I can't remember what it was, but he's got everything. We have my sister and my brother. We don't know. He's got everything. And I said, well, how about a brick at the Marine Corps Museum? And she thought, wow, that works. I think I can make that work.
Great
so
idea.
I explained the process because I'd done it. And so then a couple of years later, we worked it out where he was going to come back east with his family. His son couldn't come. He's a fighter pilot who was he was over in Iraq at the time, or Afghanistan, wherever he was.
Yeah.
Had gone to the Air Force Academy. But the 2 daughters, his wife, Carol, and all those grandkids came. And I arranged with Shelley. I said, look, we're going to be a buddy who's not a veteran, came down from Connecticut with me. We'd stayed overnight at the hotel, and we stood on a bridge where you come down off one part. I mean, I'd have to describe it to you. And so I surprised him. He had no idea I was coming. No idea. He's walking across the bridge, and he said to his grandkids, this is like the bridge on the River Kwai. And then he gets a couple feet further, and I stepped out from the other side of the bridge, And he goes, oh, man. And then he hugged me, and it's a big guy. And So I said, let's go find your brick, And he said, well, you have to look it up. I said, I already know where it is. I've already been there with my buddy Steve. So we went. And while we were there, General Lukeman came down because he had agreed to meet them because John had contributed a fair amount of money to the museum. And so we were talking, and finally, General Lukeman was listening to me, and he said, you know what? Why don't you take him on the tour? Meet me back up at my office when you're done. I can't do the job you were doing, So that's what we did. It was pretty magical, really pretty magical. And then 2 years later, I was down because I read the names on the wall, and I participated. My same buddy drove me down, and we came down in the museum, and we walked into the lobby, and General Lukeman was right there with the tour group. He goes, "You're back again?" I said, "Yes, sir, I'm back again." So when I knew I was coming and I told John, and he was really emotional, and he said he talked to Lukeman had called him up, and it was really, and then I got a letter from him the other day, a form letter, but at the very bottom in his own handwriting, "Dennis, I'm anxious to meet up with you again. Blah, blah, blah. You're the reason I speak about this occasion more often than not."
Yeah, that's
about
awesome.
the Marine Corps
It is
Museum
so awesome.
experience.
Yeah, you're going to see him a few hours.
And I'm going to say Jim. I'm not going to say General because he signed his letter Jim, and I'm 80 years old.
That's bold. That is bold.
Well, he signed it Jim. He said, "Dear
that's right.
Dennis," and he signed it Jim.
That's really good. That's awesome.
So that's part of that story. So.
That's amazing.
This is just
I could stay here all day and listen to the two of you.
Heartwarming conversation.
This is
And General
just.
Mattis is going to be there tonight.
Is he?
He's the guest speaker.
And that's right.
Get out of town.
And I heard, referencing the beginning of our conversation, General Lukeman told us, are you ready for this? That Phil Caputo is going to be there tonight.
You're kidding. That's amazing.
I know.
Well, I'm going to stick right by you.
I'm
going to make a beeline
I like
for
to
Caputo.
meet him,
I like Mattis,
exactly.
but I want to meet Caputo.
That
for the
book
book.
was
I should have brought that old book
life-changing.
with me.
I need to go in my basement and see if I still have it. I've moved it around with me since college.
Right.
But that was kind of and I don't want to go off onto we've already gone all around the trail with this, but that was a life-changing book for me. I grew up.
Same for David.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when you just mentioned that,
And it all took place here at Quantico. He talks about TBFs and
Yeah.
real quick, getting back to Jason Sanders. I just spoke to him a few days ago before I left. I said, "Hey, Mattis is going to be there." He's like, "Oh, I know him," because he got in trouble after they got back from Iraq. Sanders kept emailing him directly, like, what's going on with the medal? Why isn't Corporal Dunham getting the medal? And by then he was at Pendleton. He was like an instructor at SOI, and his chain of command was coming down on him, like, "You got to stop fucking emailing Mattis." And then Mattis, and they were gonna NJP his ass, right? But from what I heard, Jason just told me this. He said Mattis got wind of it and put the kibosh on that. He said, "You're not doing that to him." So he knows who he is. Right. He met him. He met him a while back, and General Mattis gave him a coin. But
wow,
I want to bring that up to him.
That's great.
Yes.
That's great. Well, I'm looking forward to the whole evening.
What
I'm
a
looking
great
forward
night you guys have
to both of you being able to celebrate this and just really, David, I'm so grateful to the work you do because Vic and I talk about this a lot, but storytelling is what we're about here. It's what we're about in Leatherneck. I mean, of course, we have to cover the news too, but really, it's those individual stories that make up Marine Corps history, and you do such a beautiful job of telling people's stories.
Thank you.
And so I couldn't be more thrilled for you. Congratulations.
Thank
and what
you.
an amazing story you told. Congratulations. And
To both of you. This is,
I'm
again,
glad you didn't die there.
generational impact.
Yeah.
And so I am just so thankful to the both of you for what you do. And
Thank you.
this award is so well deserved, and have a fucking fantastic time tonight.
Thanks for having
Sounds
me.
like
Thank you so much.
a lineup of shit going on too. So I'm happy for you all. Thanks again for coming in.
Thank you.
Scuttlebutt is a production of the Marine Corps Association. You have heard the voices or contributions from Major Vic Rubel, USMC retired, Nancy Litchman, William Truding, and our guest. Ty Frazier is the editor, sound engineer, and technical producer. The Marine Corps Association is not an agency of the U.S. government. The opinions expressed in this episode are the personal views of the participants and do not reflect the official position of the United States Marine Corps, the Department of Defense, or the Marine Corps Association.